A king forced the prince to marry a beggar to humiliate him. However, he was stunned by what his son said. The Harvest Festival in Boston's Central Square was in full swing. Colorful banners fluttered in the autumn breeze. Minstrels played lively tunes, and the aroma of roasted meats and fresh bread filled the air. It was a rare day when nobles and commoners mingled freely, though the distinction between them remained as clear as the gap between the opulent northern side of the square and the crowded southern edge where the working class gathered. Prince Damon Montgomery moved through the crowd with an ease that irritated his royal escort. Unlike his father, King Augustus, who appeared at public events only from elevated platforms surrounded by guards, Damon preferred to walk among the people. At 26, he cut a striking figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with intelligent blue eyes that missed little. His dark hair was tied back simply, and his clothes, while finely made, lacked the excessive ornamentation favored by most nobles. "Your Highness," whispered Lord Harrington, his advisor, with poorly disguised dismay. "Perhaps we should return to the royal pavilion. Your father will be making his address soon." Damon offered a non-committal smile. "In a moment, I've not yet tried Widow Parker's apple tarts. They're said to be the finest in New England." Harrington's pinched expression suggested he found nothing appealing about commoners' baking, but he followed dutifully as Damon approached a modest stall where an elderly woman sold pastries. The prince had just purchased 2 tarts when a commotion erupted nearby. A burly royal tax collector had grabbed a thin man by his collar, shaking him violently. "You think you can hide your earnings from the crown?" the collector bellowed. "Your neighbor saw the extra grain you've stored. That's taxable property." "Please," the man pleaded, his wife and young children cowering behind him. "That grain is seed for next season. If we surrender it now, we'll have nothing to plant come spring." The tax collector raised his hand to strike the farmer. "The law is the law, and King Augustus—" "Surely the law allows for reason," Damon interrupted. Stepping forward, the crowd fell silent immediately, parting to reveal the prince. The tax collector paled. "Your Highness, this man is withholding—" "I heard the explanation," Damon said evenly. "Seed grain is exempt from autumn taxation by the Agricultural Reform Act my father signed 3 years ago." This wasn't entirely true, but Damon had been pushing for such reforms and knew the tax collector wouldn't dare contradict him. "Of course, Your Highness. A simple misunderstanding." The collector released the farmer, who bowed deeply to Damon. "Thank you, my prince," the man whispered. "May God bless you with a long life." Damon nodded. "Plant well next spring. The kingdom thrives when its people prosper." As he turned away, Damon caught sight of a young woman watching from the edge of the gathered crowd. Unlike the others who looked at him with awe or curiosity, her gaze held something else. Recognition, perhaps, though Damon was certain they'd never met. She was dressed poorly, but stood with unusual poise, her chestnut hair partially hidden under a worn hood. Their eyes met briefly before she disappeared into the crowd. Lord Harrington cleared his throat pointedly. "Your Highness, we really must—" "Yes, to the pavilion," Damon agreed, the strange young woman already fading from his thoughts as he prepared to face his father. King Augustus Montgomery's fury was a cold, calculated thing. He did not raise his voice when Damon entered the private royal tent behind the pavilion. He merely looked up from the reports he was reviewing and fixed his son with a stare that had made hardened generals tremble. "You undermined crown authority in public," he stated flatly. Damon stood his ground. "I corrected a misapplication of tax law. You made a spectacle of contradicting a royal official and currying favor with peasants." The king set down his papers. "These philosophies of yours about equality and common representation are becoming tiresome, Damon." "They're not philosophies, Father. They're practical approaches to governance. A kingdom, Augustus cut in, requires order and respect for authority. When you indulge these people, you encourage disobedience." He studied his son with cold calculation. "Perhaps it's time you learned what these commoners you so admire are truly like." Damon tensed. Recognizing his father's tone, when King Augustus used that voice, punishments followed. "Lord Mercer," the king called. The royal spymaster stepped from the shadows where he'd been standing so quietly. Damon hadn't noticed him. "Tell my son what you observed last night." Mercer bowed slightly. "Your Highness, A young beggar woman was caught stealing bread from the palace kitchens. Not her first offense, according to the staff. And, Augustus prompted, she's remarkably educated for a street urchin, can read and write, speaks with unusual diction, claims to have been taught by an elderly woman who took her in as a child. Damon frowned. What has this to do with me? Augustus smiled thinly. Everything. You'll marry her. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Damon was certain he'd misheard. What? You admire these people so much. Claim they deserve equal treatment. Prove it. Take one as your bride. Augustus rose, approaching his son. You've refused every suitable noble match I've arranged. Perhaps a commoner will satisfy your unique sensibilities. This is madness, Damon whispered. The council would never. The council has already approved the match, Augustus said smugly. I presented it as your choice, a charitable act worthy of admiration. Taking in a poor orphan girl, no one dared object when I framed it thus. Damon struggled to master his shock. You cannot force me to marry a stranger. I am your king before I am your father. The ceremony will take place tomorrow. Augustus turned away. Consider it a lesson in consequences, my son. Defy my authority again, and you'll find I can be far less merciful. The palace chapel was adorned with hurriedly arranged flowers and candles, a mockery of celebration. Court nobles filled the pews, whispering behind jeweled fans and gloved hands. Their curiosity barely contained. Damon stood rigid at the altar, dressed in formal royal attire that felt like armor. His mind had spent the sleepless night searching for a way out of this trap, but found none that wouldn't cause greater harm. His father had been explicit, refuse, and the girl would be publicly flogged for theft before being exiled to the northern labor camps. Whatever his personal feelings, Damon couldn't condemn an innocent to such a fate. The chapel doors opened. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly as Amy Winters entered. She wore a simple blue gown, presumably the best the palace servants could provide on short notice. Her chestnut hair was arranged in a modest style, and she wore no jewelry. But what struck Damon was her composure. Though pale, she walked steadily down the aisle, her gaze fixed forward, spine straight, not cowering as one might expect from a commoner thrust into such circumstances. As she reached him, Damon realized with a jolt that she was the same young woman who had watched him at the festival. Up close, her eyes were a clear amber color, currently revealing nothing of her thoughts. Prince Damon, she said quietly, dipping into a curtsy that was surprisingly proper. Miss Winters, he replied, offering his arm as protocol demanded. As she took it, he whispered, I'm sorry for this situation. Her eyes flickered to his, and for the briefest moment, he glimpsed something unexpected. Not fear or resentment, but a sharp intelligence and, was that resolve? Perhaps we are both prisoners of circumstance, Your Highness, she whispered back, so softly he nearly missed it before he could respond. The ceremony began. As they exchanged vows neither had chosen to make, Damon felt his father's satisfied gaze boring into them from the front row. Augustus believed he'd crafted the perfect humiliation, a prince chained to a beggar. Yet when Amy's steady gaze met his during the final blessing, Damon felt an unexpected thought form. What if this punishment wasn't what it seemed? What if, somehow, it was the beginning of something else entirely? The royal chambers assigned to the newlyweds occupied the eastern wing of the palace, far from the king's quarters and those of the nobility who held his favor. Damon recognized the slight for what it was. Another layer of his father's punishment, isolating him from court influence. These will be your rooms, he told Amy as a servant opened the ornate double doors. I've arranged for adjoining chambers with a shared sitting room. Amy stepped inside, her face betraying nothing as she surveyed the gilded furnishings and tapestried walls. Though less grand than the main royal apartments, these rooms still displayed wealth beyond anything she'd likely encountered. Thank you, Your Highness, she said, her voice measured. You're most considerate. When the servants withdrew, closing the doors behind them, Damon watched as Amy's shoulders relaxed slightly. For the first time since their hasty wedding, they were truly alone. You needn't maintain formalities when it's just us, he said, loosening the stiff collar of his ceremonial attire. This marriage may be my father's cruel joke, but I've no intention of making it a prison for either of us. Amy tilted her head, studying him with those intelligent amber eyes. "What are your intentions then, Prince Damon?" "Damon," he corrected, "and I intend to survive this, as I imagine you do beyond that." He shrugged. "My father believes he's taught me a lesson about station and propriety. Let him think he's succeeded. While you continue pursuing your ideas about equality." Her lips curved in the ghost of a smile. Damon raised an eyebrow. "You know of my political views. People talk, even to beggars. Especially to beggars. We're often invisible, which makes us excellent listeners." She moved to the window, looking out over the palace gardens. "The prince who speaks for the common folk is a frequent topic in Boston's taverns and marketplaces." Something in her phrasing caught his attention. "You say we when speaking of beggars, yet you don't quite," he hesitated. "Don't quite seem like one," Amy finished, a flash of wariness crossing her features. "What does a true beggar seem like, in your experience?" Damon had the grace to look embarrassed. "Forgive me, I didn't mean to offend." "No offense taken, but you're observant." She turned from the window. "I was fortunate. An elderly woman took me in as a child. She taught me to read, to speak properly. Said knowledge was a weapon no one could take from me." "She sounds wise," Damon said, finding himself genuinely curious about this strange young woman thrust into his life. "Does she know of your current circumstances?" "Not yet," Amy replied, something unreadable flickering across her expression. "I suspect she'll discover it soon enough." The whispers began the moment Amy entered the great hall for breakfast the following morning. Damon had warned her, but the reality of 300 nobles pausing mid-conversation to stare at her was still jarring. She wore the simplest of the new gowns hastily commissioned for her, a deep green velvet with minimal embroidery. The royal clothier had worked through the night, muttering about impossible deadlines and dressing a peasant as royalty. Amy had thanked him with such gracious warmth that the man had eventually softened, promising better work once proper measurements and fittings could be arranged. "Chin up," Damon murmured, his hand light at the small of her back as they navigated the whispering crowd. "They're only dangerous if they sense fear." "Like wolves," she whispered back. "Wolves have more dignity," he replied. Drawing a small smile from her, they approached the elevated royal table where King Augustus sat with Duchess Lillian Blackwood at his side. The king's second wife was a striking woman in her early 40s, with golden hair artfully arranged and fingers adorned with enough jewels to ransom a small nation. Her son, Matthew, sat beside her, his resemblance to Damon noticeable despite his fairer coloring. "Father," Damon said, bowing just deeply enough to avoid disrespect. "May I present my wife, Amy Montgomery?" The king's expression remained impassive as Amy executed a perfect curtsy. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear and steady. Augustus studied her for a long moment. "A remarkable transformation from the kitchen thief," he finally remarked. "One might almost mistake you for someone of consequence." Before Amy could respond, Duchess Lillian leaned forward. Such a touching, charitable gesture. "Taking in a street urchin," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Though I fear you've overwhelmed the poor dear with all this splendor. Perhaps she'd be more comfortable dining with the servants." Several nearby courtiers tittered. Amy felt Damon tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. "Your concern is most kind, Your Grace," she replied, meeting the Duchess's gaze directly. "But I find that true comfort comes not from one's surroundings, but from the kindness of those within them. In that regard, I'm still forming my impressions of the palace." A hush fell over those close enough to hear. The Duchess's smile froze, then tightened into something brittle. Matthew failed to disguise a snort of surprised laughter, earning a sharp glance from his mother. King Augustus waved a dismissive hand. "Take your seats. You've provided enough entertainment for the morning," as they moved to their assigned places at the far end of the royal table. Damon leaned close. "Where did you learn to parry verbal thrusts like that?" Amy kept her expression neutral. "As I said, my guardian was thorough in my education." "Apparently so," he murmured, newfound respect in his voice. From her prime position, Duchess Lillian observed their interaction with narrowed eyes. She leaned toward a thin man seated nearby, whispering instructions that made him nod and slip away from the table. Throughout the meal, her gaze returned repeatedly to the unlikely couple, calculation evident in every glance. Late that afternoon, Damon led Amy to the royal library, a vast chamber housing thousands of volumes collected over generations. Tall windows cast long shadows across marble floors, and the scent of old parchment and leather bindings filled the air. "My sanctuary," Damon explained, running his fingers along a shelf of ancient tomes. "Father rarely comes here. He prefers hunting to reading, so I can usually find peace among the books." Amy moved through the stacks with reverent fingertips brushing spines. "It's magnificent," she breathed, her face alight with genuine wonder. "I've never seen so many books in one place." "You truly can read, then?" Damon asked, then winced. "Forgive me, that sounded like a reasonable question," she finished, pulling a volume of poetry from a shelf. "Yes, I can," my guardian insisted. She opened the book, reading aloud in a clear voice. "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings the tune without the words, and never stops at all." Damon watched her, his preconceptions crumbling further. Dickinson, not typical reading for anyone in Boston, nobility included. "Poetry helps us make sense of an often senseless world," she replied, replacing the book. "What do you read when seeking answers, Prince Damon?" Her question carried weight beyond casual curiosity. Damon hesitated, then moved to a locked cabinet in the library's rear corner. Producing a key from his pocket, he unlocked it. "History," he said, removing a half-burned document. "Particularly the kind my father would prefer remained buried." Amy approached cautiously. "What is it?" "A record of succession, partially destroyed during what official history calls the tragic palace fire 20 years ago." His fingers traced the charred edges. "The fire that killed my uncle, the rightful king, along with his wife and infant daughter. You don't believe it was an accident," Amy stated, her voice suddenly tight. Damon's blue eyes met hers. "I was 6 when my father took the throne, too young to question the convenient timing. My uncle's death just as he was implementing reforms that threatened certain noble interests." He carefully unfolded the damaged parchment. "I found this hidden behind a loose stone in the old throne room 5 years ago. It mentions a witness to events that night, someone named E, who escaped with crucial evidence." Amy stared at the document, her face pale. "Have you told anyone about this?" "Who would I tell? The council members are all appointed by my father. The royal guards answer to him." Damon carefully returned the document to its hiding place. "But I keep searching. There are gaps in our history, Amy. Inconsistencies that..." A noise at the library entrance cut him off. They turned to see Matthew Blackwood standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "My brother, the scholar," he drawled, "and his new bride. Mother sent me to escort you both to dinner." His gaze flickered to the locked cabinet. "Finding anything enlightening in your reading?" Damon closed the cabinet, locking it with deliberate calm. "Just acquainting Amy with the library. She has quite an appreciation for literature." "How delightful," Matthew replied, his tone making clear how undelightful he found it. Such refined tastes for a former beggar, almost as if she'd been prepared for palace life. Amy met his gaze steadily. "Books are available to anyone who truly seeks knowledge, Lord Matthew. The challenge is recognizing their value." Matthew's eyes narrowed slightly before he forced a smile. "Indeed. Well, shall we? Mother has arranged a special seating for tonight's meal. She's quite eager to become better acquainted with the newest addition to our family." As they followed Matthew from the library, Damon placed a protective hand at Amy's elbow. The gesture wasn't lost on his half-brother, whose smile thinned as he observed their unexpected unity. Behind them, unseen in the shadow of a bookcase, a servant watched their departure before slipping through a hidden panel in the wall, one of many secret passages threading through the palace like veins in an aging body. Carrying whispers of secrets and conspiracies, 3 days after her unexpected elevation to royalty, Amy slipped out of the palace before dawn. She wore a plain brown dress and woolen cloak borrowed from a kitchen maid, her hair hidden beneath a simple cap. The guard at the servants' gate barely glanced at her, just another early-rising worker heading to the markets. Boston was waking as she navigated familiar streets. Bakers slid loaves into stone ovens, fishermen hauled the night's catch to market stalls, and water carriers trudged with their heavy yokes. Amy moved through this world with practiced ease, keeping her head down, just another anonymous figure in the city's daily choreography. North Street curved away from the harbor, climbing toward the hills where the poorest of Boston's citizens made their homes. The buildings here leaned precariously, as if supporting one another against gravity's pull. Amy stopped before a narrow 3-story house wedged between a cooper's workshop and an abandoned stable. Its windows were intact, unusual for the neighborhood, and the small front steps had been recently swept. She knocked in a distinctive pattern. 2 quick raps, pause, 3 more. The door opened to reveal a stooped figure wrapped in layers of faded garments, face partially obscured by a gray woolen scarf. Only the woman's eyes were fully visible, sharp as a hawk's despite the wrinkles surrounding them. "You're late," the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong. "And dressed like a servant when you're now a princess. Interesting choice." "I needed to avoid attention, Eleanor," Amy replied, stepping inside. "And I'm not late. Dawn barely broke." Eleanor secured the door with 3 separate locks before leading Amy through a cramped sitting room to a back chamber. Unlike the house's humble exterior, this room contained unexpected treasures: shelves of leather-bound books, a polished writing desk, maps of New England pinned to walls, and a small but elegant chess set carved from ivory and ebony. "Sit," Eleanor commanded, removing her head covering to reveal silver hair tied in a severe knot. Her face, no longer hidden, showed the refined bone structure that even advanced age couldn't diminish. "Tell me everything, leave nothing out," Amy described the hasty wedding, her reception at court, and the antagonism from the Duchess. When she mentioned Damon's discovery in the library, Eleanor went completely still. "He found a succession document," she asked sharply. "What exactly did it say?" "It was badly burned. He could only make out fragments. Mentions of someone called E who escaped with evidence. I couldn't study it closely without arousing suspicion." Amy leaned forward. "Eleanor, he suspects the truth about his father, about how Augustus took the throne." Eleanor's weathered hands trembled slightly as she poured tea into 2 chipped cups. "After 20 years of waiting, to have the king thrust you directly into the palace." She shook her head. "The fates have a twisted sense of humor. Or perhaps they've finally aligned in our favor," Amy countered. "Damon is not what I expected. He genuinely cares about the common people. He questions his father's rule if he knew the truth." "Truth is dangerous," Eleanor cut in. "Especially partial truths. If Damon starts making accusations without proper evidence, Augustus will silence him. Son or not." She fixed Amy with a penetrating stare. "You cannot tell him who you really are, not yet." Amy's fingers tightened around her cup. "How long must I pretend every day at court I sit near the man who murdered my parents, who usurped my father's throne, who would not hesitate to finish what he started if he suspected your identity?" Eleanor finished firmly. "Patience, child. We've waited 20 years. We can wait a little longer." Her expression softened slightly. "Tell me more about the prince. Is he kind to you?" "Yes," Amy admitted. "Despite the humiliation my presence brings him, he's been respectful, almost protective." A faint blush colored her cheeks, Eleanor noticed. "Be careful, Amy. Attachment to Damon Montgomery complicates matters." "He's not just Damon Montgomery," Amy argued. "He's my cousin, though he doesn't know it. And if what you've told me about my parents is true, he was meant to be my betrothed from birth, a union to solidify the royal line. Ironic that Augustus unwittingly fulfilled his brother's plan," Eleanor mused. "Still, sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford. Remember your purpose." Amy nodded solemnly. "To survive, to learn, to gather evidence of Augustus's treason." She recited the mantra Eleanor had instilled since childhood. "And when the time is right, to reclaim what was stolen." "Good." Eleanor rose with the aid of a cane hidden within the folds of her garments, from a concealed compartment in the writing desk. She withdrew a small leather pouch. "Keep this with you. It contains herbs that, when steeped in hot water, will protect you from certain ailments that might befall a new bride." Amy accepted the pouch, understanding the implication. "Damon has made no such demands. He's arranged separate sleeping quarters. Men's restraint is as changeable as March weather," Eleanor warned. "Be prepared for all contingencies." She moved to the window, peering through a narrow gap in the shutters. "You should return soon. The palace will be waking. When shall I come again?" "Not for at least a fortnight. Establish your routine first. Learn which servants can be trusted." Eleanor handed Amy a sealed letter. "If urgent need arises, give this to the fish merchant at the East Market. Ask for smoked eel. He'll know what it means. Amy tucked the letter into her bodice. The Duchess suspects something. Her son, Matthew, seems to be watching me. Matthew Blackwood, Eleanor murmured. The bastard prince. He bears watching himself. His mother's ambition runs in his veins, but rumors suggest he lacks her ruthlessness. He seems conflicted, Amy agreed. Loyal to his mother, yet sometimes I catch him looking at Damon with something like admiration. Division among our enemies serves us well. Eleanor's gaze softened as she touched Amy's cheek. You've waited so long for this moment. Now you walk among them as equals, though they don't know the true blood that flows in your veins. Royal blood means nothing if I can't use it to bring justice, Amy replied. Eleanor smiled faintly. Your father would be proud of the woman you've become. Now go, and remember, in that palace, trust no one completely, not even Damon. Amy retraced her steps toward the palace, mind churning with Eleanor's warnings. So focused was she on her thoughts that she nearly collided with a cloaked figure turning a corner. Forgive me, she began, then froze as the man's hood shifted, revealing a face she recognized. Lord Mercer, the king's spymaster. His eyes widened in recognition. Princess Amy, alone in the city at this hour. Amy's mind raced. I was visiting an old friend, someone who looked after me before. She forced a smile. Old habits. I needed to assure her I was well. Mercer's gaze was calculating. How loyal of you to remember those from your past, especially so early in the morning, before the palace would note your absence. My friend rises with the dawn. She's elderly and... Amy stopped, realizing explanations only deepened suspicion. I should return to the palace. Indeed you should, Mercer agreed smoothly. Allow me to escort you. They walked in tense silence. At the main palace gate, Mercer bowed. I trust you'll find more convenient times for your charitable visits in future. Of course, Amy replied, maintaining her composure though her heart pounded. One small suggestion, he added, voice deceptively gentle. It might be wise not to mention our encounter to anyone. The king values discretion in royal matters, and a princess wandering alone might cause unnecessary concern. The threat beneath his courteous words was unmistakable. Amy nodded once before hurrying through the gate. She hadn't gone 10 paces into the palace grounds when a figure emerged from behind a hedge. There you are, Damon said, relief evident in his voice. I was worried when I found your chambers empty. Amy summoned a smile. I needed fresh air. The palace walls can feel confining after a life spent in open streets. Damon studied her face. You look troubled. Just adjusting, she assured him. Change comes with challenges, even positive ones. His eyes held concern, but he nodded. Come, breakfast awaits, and after, if you're willing, I'd like to show you something in the old records room. Documents about my uncle's reign that might interest you. As they walked toward the palace, Amy glanced back once to see Mercer watching them. His expression unreadable. She'd been careless, and now the king's most dangerous servant had taken notice of her. Eleanor's warnings echoed in her mind. Trust no one completely. Yet as Damon's hand touched her elbow, steadying her on the palace steps, Amy wondered if absolute caution was possible when her heart had already begun to betray her. The Royal Stag Tavern sat on the boundary between Boston's Merchant District and the rougher dockside neighborhood. Its location made it neutral ground where dock workers, craftsmen, and even minor nobles might share tables without causing scandal. Most importantly, its owner, Jacob Finch, had once been a royal cook under the previous king's reign, before a convenient injury led to his retirement just prior to the palace fire. Damon entered through the back door wearing a simple brown cloak that concealed his fine clothing. The private room upstairs was reserved for Master Wilson and Friends, an alias he'd used for years during these clandestine meetings. You're late, you're high, Jacob began when Damon entered. Wilson, Damon corrected quietly. Just Wilson tonight, Jacob nodded, bolting the door behind him. The others are waiting. 5 people sat around a scarred oak table, conversation halting as Damon entered. He recognized each face. Martha Green, once his uncle's head laundress, Samuel Cooper, a silversmith whose family had crafted the royal seals for 3 generations. Thomas Reed, a ship captain who ferried supplies to the northern colonies. Rebecca Watson, whose husband had been executed for sedition during Augustus's first year on the throne. and William Frost, once a palace guard, now a respected veteran training young men in swordsmanship. "Thank you for coming," Damon said, taking the empty chair, "especially given the unusual circumstances of late." "You mean your marriage to a beggar girl?" Samuel asked bluntly. "The whole city speaks of nothing else. Is it true the king forced the match?" Rebecca leaned forward. "As punishment for your defense of that farmer at the festival." Damon nodded. "My father believes he's taught me humility by chaining me to someone he considers beneath notice." A wry smile crossed his face. "He may have miscalculated." "How so?" William asked. "Amy is not what she seems." Damon chose his words carefully. "She's educated, observant, and I believe she may have connections to people who remember the truth about my uncle's death." The room fell silent. Martha's hand moved to her throat. "You've found evidence." "Fragments. Nothing definitive yet." Damon leaned forward. "But there's something else. Unrest grows in the western townships. The new taxation on winter grain storage has driven 3 communities to petition the king directly." Thomas snorted. "Fat lot of good that will do. Augustus will ignore them, as he does all who cannot line his pockets." "Not this time," Damon countered, "because I've arranged for their representatives to present their case to the full royal council next week." "How did you manage that?" William asked, impressed. "Council bylaws state that any petition with the support of a royal family member must be granted a hearing." Damon smiled thinly. "As father has so recently reminded everyone, I am still a prince." Rebecca tapped her fingers nervously on the table. "The king will be furious." "Let him be." Damon's voice hardened. "People are suffering while the palace throws lavish feasts. If the council hears direct testimony from farmers who can't feed their children due to royal policy, perhaps a few consciences will stir, or a few heads will roll," Samuel muttered. "We're approaching this the wrong way," Thomas argued. "Petitions and council hearings won't change anything. The northern colonies are already whispering of armed resistance. Maybe they have the right idea." "Violence begets violence," Damon replied firmly. "My father's reign began in bloodshed. I won't continue that cycle." "Noble sentiments," William said. "But what if peaceful means fail?" Damon had no answer. The question had haunted his own thoughts. Martha, who'd remained quiet, finally spoke. "The prince is right to try legitimate channels first, but we should prepare for darker possibilities." Her eyes, which had watched 2 kings reign, held a hardness born of experience. "I served in the palace when the current king's brother was murdered. Those who whispered doubts about the accidental fire disappeared one by one." "What do you remember of that night, Martha?" Damon asked quietly. The old woman glanced at the door, a lifetime of caution evident in the gesture. "I was assigned to the queen's chambers. When the alarm rang, smoke was already filling the corridors. I tried to reach the royal apartments, but guards, not the regular palace guard, mind you, but men I'd never seen before, blocked the way." "Under whose orders?" William leaned forward. "Your father's," Martha said to Damon. "He claimed he was coordinating the emergency response. But later that night, I overheard him with Lord Blackwood, the Duchess's first husband, speaking of loose ends and witnesses." Samuel swore under his breath. "You never mentioned this before." "Because I value my neck," Martha snapped. "And without proof, such accusations against the king would be a death sentence." The group fell silent again, the weight of 20 years of suspicion and fear hanging in the air. "We need evidence," Damon finally said. "Something irrefutable that could sway the council, the military commanders, the people." "There were rumors," Rebecca said hesitantly, "that someone escaped the fire with documents. My husband mentioned it once." "Before he was arrested," William nodded slowly. "I heard similar whispers. A royal attendant, perhaps, or a guard loyal to the old king." Damon's mind turned to the burned document in the library. Someone named E, who escaped with evidence. If such a person exists, finding them becomes our priority. Jacob, who had been standing watch by the door, interrupted. "Curfew bells in 20 minutes. You should all leave separately." As the group disbanded with careful plans for their next meeting, Damon lingered. "Jacob, you were in the palace kitchens that night. Did you see anything?" The tavern keeper's eyes clouded. "Just smoke and chaos, but..." He hesitated. The Queen's personal maid, Elizabeth something, never saw her after that night. Some said she died in the fire, but no body was found. Elizabeth, Damon repeated. Someone whose name started with E. Probably nothing. Jacob shrugged. 20 years is a long time to hide. Unless you had good reason to stay hidden, Damon murmured. Thank you, Jacob. Amy sat in the palace gardens, a book open on her lap. Though her attention was on the grounds beyond the ornamental hedges, she'd spent the week mapping the palace layout, noting guard rotations, and identifying which servants might be sympathetic to her cause, enjoying the fresh air. Princess, she turned to find Matthew Blackwood approaching, his customary sardonic smile in place. Lord Matthew, she acknowledged. Yes, the gardens are lovely. My mother sent me to invite you to her private salon this afternoon. He studied her with undisguised curiosity. She's quite eager to know you better. How kind, Amy replied neutrally. Though I wonder why the Duchess didn't extend this invitation herself. Matthew's smile widened. Mother prefers to delegate unpleasant tasks. She finds your elevation disturbing. And you, Amy closed her book. Do you find me disturbing as well? I find you fascinating, he admitted. A beggar girl who speaks like a scholar, who carries herself like nobility, who somehow earned my brother's protection. He leaned closer. What game are you playing, Amy Winters? No game, my lord. Merely trying to survive an unexpected change in circumstances. Matthew chuckled. Everyone in this palace is playing a game. The stakes merely differ. He straightened. 4 o'clock in the Duchess's chambers, don't be late. Mother despises tardiness almost as much as she despises threats to her position. As he walked away, Amy noticed Damon crossing the garden, returning from wherever he'd disappeared to that morning. Their eyes met, and something warm unfurled in her chest, despite Eleanor's warnings. Was Matthew bothering you? Damon asked, joining her on the bench. Just delivering an invitation from his mother, apparently. I'm to be subjected to an afternoon of forced pleasantries. Damon grimaced. Lillian rarely does anything without purpose. Be careful what you reveal. I've spent my life being careful, Amy replied. Where were you this morning? Your absence was noted. Business in the city, he said vaguely. There's growing discontent in the western townships over the grain storage taxes. I've arranged for farmers' representatives to address the council. Amy's eyebrows rose. Your father allowed this. He couldn't prevent it without violating council bylaws. Damon's smile held satisfaction. It's a small victory, but perhaps the beginning of change, or the beginning of more severe retaliation, Amy cautioned. Damon's expression grew serious. I've been investigating my uncle's death, speaking with former palace staff who served during his reign. He hesitated. There's mention of a maid named Elizabeth who disappeared the night of the fire. The document I showed you referred to someone called E, who escaped with evidence. Amy fought to keep her expression neutral, though her heart pounded. Eleanor, he was getting dangerously close to the truth. Have you mentioned this to anyone else? She asked carefully. Only trusted allies. Damon studied her face. You're concerned. Investigating the king's role in your uncle's death is dangerous, she said truthfully. If this Elizabeth had evidence of wrongdoing and has remained hidden for 20 years, she must have compelling reasons. Damon took her hand, the gesture startling her. I've never spoken of this to anyone in the palace before you, he admitted, but I feel I can trust you. Strange as that sounds given our circumstances. Amy looked at their joined hands, conflicted emotions churning within her. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Yet Damon's openness touched something deep within her, a longing for connection she'd denied for years. Trust is precious, she said softly, and rare in these walls. I'm honored by yours. His blue eyes, so like her father's in Eleanor's few surviving portraits, held hers. For a moment, the garden around them faded, and Amy felt the dangerous pull of emotions beyond her caution and quest for justice. Then a palace clock chimed the hour, breaking the spell. I should prepare for the Duchess's invitation, Amy said, withdrawing her hand reluctantly. Be watchful, Damon advised, his voice low. Lillian Blackwood has dreams of seeing her son on the throne. Anyone close to me becomes an obstacle to her ambitions. As Amy walked back toward the palace, She felt Matthew's eyes following her from an upper window. Seeds of rebellion were sprouting throughout the kingdom, she realized, in rural townships, in secret tavern meetings, and perhaps most dangerously, in her own heart. Duchess Lillian Blackwood's private salon occupied a coveted position in the palace's western wing, where afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the harbor. Unlike the dark wood and heavy tapestries that dominated most royal chambers, the Duchess favored lighter touches: cream-colored walls, gilded furniture, and delicate porcelain figurines displayed on lacquered shelves. Amy entered this elegant trap precisely at 4 o'clock. The Duchess reclined on a blue silk chaise, while two noblewomen Amy recognized from court sat nearby, embroidery hoops in hand, but eyes sharp with curiosity. "Princess Amy," Lillian greeted, the title sounding like an insult on her lips. "How good of you to join us, ladies. You may leave us." The women departed with obvious reluctance, closing the doors behind them. "Please sit." Lillian gestured to a chair positioned directly facing the sunlight, a small cruelty meant to put her guest at disadvantage. "Tea? Thank you, Your Grace." Amy selected a different chair, angled away from the glare, and accepted the offered cup with a steady hand. Lillian's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I thought it time we became better acquainted, given your unexpected position in the royal family." "Most kind of you. Tell me," Lillian continued, "how are you adjusting to palace life? It must be overwhelming after your previous circumstances." "Change always requires adjustment," Amy replied carefully, "but people are remarkably adaptable." "Indeed," Lillian sipped her tea. "I've noticed your rather surprising facility with court etiquette. One might almost think you'd received training." Amy met the Duchess's calculating gaze. "I've always been observant, and I had a guardian who believed education shouldn't be limited by one's station." "How progressive." Lillian set down her cup. "This guardian, she must be quite remarkable. I'd very much like to meet her. She's elderly and rarely leaves her home." Amy deflected. "But I'll convey your interest." "Please do." Lillian leaned forward. "You know, when I first married into the royal family, I too felt like an outsider. King Augustus had been widowed for nearly a year, still grieving his first wife's tragic death in the palace fire. The same fire that killed his brother and family," Amy noted, unable to keep a slight edge from her voice. "A terrible tragedy," Lillian agreed smoothly. "But from such darkness came light. Augustus proved himself a strong leader in crisis. The kingdom needed stability then, just as it does now." Her eyes narrowed, something that those who agitate for change often fail to appreciate. "Perhaps change and stability aren't mutually exclusive," Amy suggested. "King Thomas, Augustus's brother, was implementing reforms without sacrificing order. As I understand it," Lillian's expression hardened, "you seem remarkably well informed about events that occurred when you were an infant. Tell me, where do you get your historical knowledge, Princess?" Before Amy could answer, the doors swung open as Matthew entered unannounced. "Mother, forgive the interruption." His eyes flickered between the women. Sensing tension, "Father requests your presence. The Western Township delegation has arrived early, demanding an immediate hearing." Lillian's face tightened with annoyance. "Damon's doing, no doubt, tiresome." She rose gracefully. "Princess Amy, we must continue our conversation another time." "I look forward to it," Amy lied politely. As the Duchess swept from the room, Matthew lingered, studying Amy with that same unsettling intensity he often displayed. "My mother doesn't usually take such interest in people she considers beneath her," he remarked. "You've made quite an impression. Not a favorable one, I think. Few impressions on my mother are favorable. She sees the world as a hierarchy with herself near its peak." He moved to a sideboard, pouring amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "Drink. It's early, but after an audience with my mother, most people need one." Amy declined with a small shake of her head. "Wise choice," Matthew said, sipping his own drink. "Keeping your wits sharp around us is advisable." He studied her over the rim of his glass. "You know she's having you watched." Amy stilled. "Is that a threat, Lord Matthew?" "An observation, and a warning, perhaps." He set down his glass. "Despite what you might think, I don't share all my mother's ambitions or methods." "Why tell me this?" "Curiosity. Self-interest." He shrugged. Perhaps I simply enjoy disrupting expectations. A knock at the door interrupted them. A servant entered, bowing nervously. "Forgive me, my lord. Prince Damon requests Princess Amy's presence in the eastern courtyard. The royal carriage is prepared for their planned excursion." Matthew's eyebrows rose. "Excursion? Where might you be going?" "Prince Damon offered to show me the countryside," Amy replied, rising. "With His Majesty's permission, of course." "Of course," Matthew echoed, skepticism evident. "Well, don't let me keep you from your sightseeing." As Amy followed the servant out, she felt Matthew's gaze on her back. Not hostile, but too perceptive for comfort. "You rescued me from an uncomfortable situation," Amy told Damon as their carriage rolled through Boston's outskirts. "Though I didn't know we had a planned excursion." "A necessary fabrication," Damon replied. "Father is preoccupied with the township delegation, and Lillian will be busy ensuring their complaints go nowhere. It's the perfect opportunity." "For what?" Amy asked, though she suspected the answer. "To visit my uncle's summer residence." Damon's expression was determined. "Rosehill Haven has been abandoned since the fire. Father claims it's out of respect, but I believe it's because evidence may remain there." Amy's pulse quickened. "Isn't it guarded?" "Minimally, a caretaker who's easily bribed, and 2 guards who change shifts at dusk, leaving a brief window when the property is virtually unattended." He gave her an appraising look. "You don't have to come. I can return you to the palace." "No," Amy said firmly. "I want to help." The journey took nearly 2 hours, the carriage eventually turning onto an overgrown road that wound through thick woods. Rosehill Haven emerged from the trees, a graceful 3-story manor of pale stone with ivy climbing its weathered walls. Despite years of neglect, it retained an elegant dignity. "It's beautiful," Amy whispered, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. This had been her family's refuge, where her earliest memories had formed. "My uncle spent summers here with his wife and daughter," Damon said softly. "I have vague memories of visiting as a child. There was a garden with roses the color of sunset, and a small maze where my cousin and I would play hide and seek." Amy turned away to hide her reaction. "Your cousin? You remember her?" "Barely. She was just a toddler." Damon's voice held sadness. "She would have been about your age now had she lived." The carriage stopped at a side entrance. Damon handed the driver a pouch of coins. "Wait in the village. Return at nightfall." Once alone, they approached the house. Damon produced a key. "Copied from my father's private collection," he explained, unlocking a servant's entrance. Inside, furniture draped in yellowed sheets loomed like ghosts. Dust motes danced in beams of light filtering through shuttered windows. The air hung heavy with the scent of abandonment and faded memories. "What exactly are we looking for?" Amy asked, removing her cloak. "My sources say the Queen kept a private diary," Damon replied, leading her upstairs. Before her marriage, she served as royal record keeper. Unusual for a woman, but she had exceptional skills, supposedly. She documented everything, including concerns about threats to her husband's rule. The master chambers were at the end of a long hallway. Inside, time seemed suspended. Cosmetics still arranged on a vanity, a book open on a bedside table, a child's wooden horse abandoned in a corner. "They left in haste that last time," Damon said quietly. "Called back to the palace for an urgent council meeting. The meeting that ended in arguments, followed that night by the fire." Amy moved to the vanity, running fingers over the surface where her mother had once sat. Fighting to maintain composure, she forced herself to think methodically. If the Queen kept a diary, where would she hide it? Somewhere accessible but not obvious. They searched methodically, checking for hollow spaces in walls, loose floorboards, false bottoms in drawers. An hour passed without success. "Perhaps we're approaching this wrong," Amy suggested, studying the room. "Think like a record keeper. What's the most important thing to them? Organization? Accessibility? Protection from the elements?" Damon listed, frowning in concentration. "And misdirection," Amy added, "hiding important things in plain sight." Her gaze fell on a row of identical leather-bound volumes on a bookshelf. She pulled one out, a household account book. Filled with neat columns of expenditures, she checked another and another. All seemed to be ordinary records. "These are all household accounts, arranged by year. she noted, then paused at a volume labeled simply, Personal Accounts. Unlike the others, this book was locked with a small brass clasp. This one's different, she said, showing Damon. He examined it carefully. The lock is tiny. I don't suppose you know how to pick it. Amy smiled faintly. Another skill my guardian thought prudent to teach me. From her hair, she removed a thin metal pin and inserted it into the lock. After a moment of careful manipulation, the clasp clicked open. Inside was not an account book, but a diary, written in a neat, precise hand. Damon turned the pages carefully, both of them scanning the entries. Look, Amy pointed to an entry dated 3 weeks before the fire. A. Grows more hostile daily. Today he openly questioned his right to the throne at council, claiming the northern lords would support a stronger ruler. T. Dismisses the threat, but I fear his brother's ambition exceeds his loyalty. Lord B. seems to encourage this discord. I've secured copies of the original succession documents in case they mysteriously disappear, as other records have recently. A. Must be Augustus, Damon said tensely. And Lord B. Blackwood, Lillian's first husband, and one of Father's closest allies before his death. They continued reading, finding increasingly worried entries until the final one, dated the very day of the fire. T. has finally agreed to take precautions. I've entrusted copies of all critical documents to E, who will deliver them to our most loyal supporters if necessary. The original royal seal and my personal record of these troubled months will remain hidden at Rosehill, where A would never think to look if my fears prove unfounded. Thank Providence. If not, may these words someday help restore justice. E, Damon whispered. Elizabeth, the missing maid. She must have been the Queen's confidant. Amy stared at the page, recognizing her mother's handwriting, fighting back tears. We need to take this with us, she said urgently. It's the evidence you've been seeking. A sudden noise from downstairs froze them both. Footsteps and voices. Multiple people entering the house. Someone's here, Damon whispered, closing the diary and handing it to Amy, who quickly concealed it in her dress. We need to leave now. This way, Damon whispered, guiding Amy toward a servant's staircase at the far end of the hallway. The voices below grew louder. At least 3 people, moving methodically through the ground floor. Check the upper rooms thoroughly. The prince's carriage was spotted on the road. Amy recognized Lord Mercer's voice and felt a chill. The king's spymaster had followed them. They crept down the narrow stairs, pausing at each creak of aged wood. The staircase emptied into a small alcove off the kitchen. Damon peered around the corner, then pulled back quickly. 2 guards blocking the rear exit, he murmured. How did they find us? Amy whispered. I suspect we've had a spy among my trusted circle. His expression darkened. We need another way out. The cellar might... There's a hidden door, Amy interrupted, then caught herself. I mean, houses like this often have escape routes for servants. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Damon gave her an odd look, but nodded. Where would it be? Amy tried to recall Eleanor's detailed descriptions of Rosehill from her childhood lessons. The pantry, perhaps, behind the wine racks. They slipped into the large pantry adjoining the kitchen. Empty shelves lined the walls, and a dusty wine rack stood against the back wall. Damon began checking for loose panels around it. Help me move this, he whispered, gripping one side of the heavy rack. Together they shifted it, revealing a narrow wooden door with a simple iron latch. Damon lifted it carefully, wincing at the slight squeal of rusted metal. How did you know? He asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Lucky guess, Amy replied, avoiding his eyes. A shout from upstairs indicated the search party had reached the master chambers. Without further hesitation, they slipped through the doorway into a rough-hewn tunnel reinforced with timber supports. Remarkable, Damon murmured, pulling the door closed behind them. This must lead to the woods beyond the property. We should hurry, Amy urged, feeling her way along the dark passage. They moved as quickly as they dared, guided only by thin streams of light filtering through cracks in the tunnel ceiling. After what seemed an eternity, they reached a steep set of stairs leading up to a trap door. Damon climbed first, pushing it open cautiously. Clear, he whispered, helping Amy up. They emerged in a small clearing surrounded by dense trees, perhaps half a mile from the main house. In the distance, they could see guards beginning to search the grounds. The village is that way. Damon pointed east. If we circle around through the forest, we might reach it undetected. And if the carriage driver has been compromised, then we'll find another way back to Boston. He took her hand. Come on. They moved swiftly through the woods, following game trails when possible, aware of pursuit gathering behind them. Thunder rumbled overhead as dark clouds rolled in from the coast, promising a storm. Perfect timing, Damon muttered, as the first heavy drops began to fall. Though it may help cover our tracks. The rain intensified quickly, soaking through their clothing. By the time they reached the village outskirts, they were drenched and shivering. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a bone-shaking thunderclap. We need shelter, Amy said through chattering teeth. Where? Prince Damon. They turned to see a young man approaching, leading 2 horses. With a jolt, Amy recognized Matthew Blackwood. Matthew. Damon's hand moved to where a dagger was concealed in his belt. What an unexpected surprise. Indeed, Matthew's gaze took in their bedraggled appearance, though perhaps not as surprising as finding my brother and his bride sneaking around a supposedly abandoned estate during a storm. He didn't seem particularly concerned by the rain pelting his expensive cloak. Your carriage driver proved remarkably forthcoming when questioned about his instruction to wait here. Are you here to arrest us on Father's behalf? Damon asked coldly. Matthew raised an eyebrow. If I were acting as Father's agent, I'd have brought a dozen guards, not come alone. He glanced at the woods behind them. However, Mercer and his men are perhaps 15 minutes behind you. I suggest we continue this conversation somewhere less exposed. Damon hesitated, clearly weighing their limited options. The summer house at Cooper's Pond, Matthew suggested. It's nearby and isolated. No one will think to look for you there tonight. After a moment's consideration, Damon nodded. Lead the way. The summer house was little more than a well-built cabin overlooking a small lake, but it offered shelter from the worsening storm. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and basic furnishings, a table, chairs, a small bed, filled the single room. Matthew busied himself lighting a fire while Damon and Amy remained near the door. Wary, why are you helping us? Damon finally asked. Matthew glanced up from the growing flames. Contrary to what you might believe, brother, I don't always align with our father's interests, or my mother's. That doesn't answer my question. Sighing, Matthew stood. I followed you because I was curious about what was so important at Rosehill that you'd risk the king's wrath to investigate it. Then I spotted Mercer's men on your trail and, he shrugged. Let's just say I dislike the spy master even more than you do. Amy studied him, trying to discern truth from calculation. You've placed yourself in danger by helping us. Perhaps. Matthew's smile held little humor. Or perhaps I'm simply positioning myself advantageously for whatever comes next. He gestured to their wet clothing. There are blankets in that chest. You should dry yourselves before you catch your death. While Damon checked the cabin's perimeter, making sure it was secure, Amy wrapped herself in a rough woolen blanket. The diary was still safely hidden in her bodice, though damp from the rain. Did you find what you were looking for? Matthew asked casually. Too casually. Why do you ask? Amy countered. Because I know my brother. He wouldn't risk so much without good reason. Matthew leaned against the hearth, shadows dancing across his face. And because I've heard the whispers, too, about how my stepfather really came to power. Damon rejoined them, his expression guarded. What whispers? That the palace fire wasn't an accident. That Augustus orchestrated his brother's death to take the throne. Matthew's voice remained even. That my own father, Lord Blackwood, may have helped him do it. Silence fell, broken only by the crackling fire and rain lashing against the windows. If that were true, Damon said carefully, it would be treason of the highest order. Indeed, the kind that would end with heads on spikes. Matthew studied them both, but proving such allegations would require extraordinary evidence. Amy felt the weight of the diary against her skin. And if such evidence existed, what then? An excellent question. Matthew poured 3 cups of wine from a bottle he'd brought in his saddlebag. What then, indeed? He handed them each a cup. A toast, perhaps, to truth, however inconvenient it may be. Damon accepted the wine but didn't drink. Your mother has clear ambitions for you. Matthew, if these whispers Prove true. You'd lose your chance at the throne you've been raised to covet. Matthew's expression hardened momentarily before he laughed, a sound without mirth. The throne I've been raised to covet. Is that how you see me, brother? The scheming bastard prince, desperate for a crown. Isn't it accurate? Damon challenged. Perhaps once. Matthew sipped his wine. But I've watched you these past years, defying father to help those he'd rather ignore. I've seen the loyalty you inspire, not through fear, but through genuine concern for others. His voice lowered. I've also seen what power does to men like our father, how it twists them. A flash of lightning illuminated the cabin, casting stark shadows across their faces. In that brief illumination, Amy saw something in Matthew's eyes she hadn't expected. Sincerity, and perhaps a trace of admiration. The storm's worsening, Matthew observed as thunder shook the small building. You'll need to stay here tonight. I should return to the village before my absence is noted. And tomorrow, Damon asked. Mercer will still be searching, but I can create a distraction. Lead him to believe you fled north. Matthew moved toward the door. Use that time wisely, whatever you found at Rosehill. I suspect it's only part of what you'll need. He paused, hand on the latch. And Damon, choose your confidants carefully. Not everyone in your circle deserves your trust. After he left, Damon secured the door. What do you make of that? Amy stared at the fire, considering. I'm not certain. Either he's sincere in wanting to help, or he's playing a deeper game, Damon finished. He sat beside her, the firelight casting a warm glow on his troubled features. Let's examine what we found. Amy withdrew the diary from her dress. Thankfully, it had remained mostly dry, protected by layers of fabric. They opened it carefully on the table, turning pages with gentle fingers. My mother often spoke of Queen Catherine's meticulous nature, Damon said quietly. How she documented everything, preserved history others might prefer forgotten. Amy traced a line of elegant script, knowing it was her mother's hand. The weight of what they'd discovered, and what it meant for both of them, pressed upon her conscience. She should tell him the truth now, reveal who she really was. Damon, Her words were cut short as his fingers paused on a particular page. Look at this, he said, voice tight with discovery. The entry described a private meeting where Augustus had explicitly threatened his brother, claiming the northern lords would support his claim if Thomas didn't abandon his reforms. Beside this damning account was a small sketch of a medallion, the royal seal of the true monarch. The queen mentions hiding the original seal at Rosehill, Damon recalled. If we could find it, it would provide physical proof to support the diary's claims. Amy finished. Their eyes met across the table, the firelight reflecting determination in both their faces. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the small cabin, a fragile hope had taken root. A hope for truth, for justice, and perhaps for a future neither had dared imagine. They returned to Boston early the next morning, riding the horses Matthew had left for them. The storm had passed, leaving muddy roads and fallen branches in its wake. By unspoken agreement, they avoided main thoroughfares, taking winding paths through farmland to approach the city from the west. We can't return to the palace immediately, Damon said, as they paused on a hillside overlooking Boston Harbor. Mercer will be watching all entrances. Where then? Amy asked. I know a place. He led them toward the mercantile district, to an unassuming warehouse near the docks. Inside, Samuel Cooper greeted them with evident relief. Thank the heavens, the silversmith exclaimed. Word spread that you'd disappeared, and the king was furious. We need a secure place to hide something important, Damon explained, and a way to get a message to Eleanor of North Street without being detected. Amy's head snapped up at the mention of her guardian. Eleanor, the woman who raised you, Damon clarified. She may be our best connection to this Elizabeth who served my uncle's family. Samuel nodded. I can arrange a message. My apprentice is trustworthy and unknown to the palace guards. While Samuel dispatched his apprentice, Amy and Damon retreated to a small office above the workshop. Once alone, Amy confronted him. How did you know about Eleanor? I've been making discreet inquiries, he admitted. After our conversation in the garden, I realized she might be the key to finding Elizabeth. Perhaps they're even the same person. Amy's heart raced. He was dangerously close to the truth. What makes you think that? The timing of her appearance in Boston matches the palace fire, her unusual interest in palace affairs, according to what you've told me, the exceptional education she provided you. He studied her face. And your reaction just now confirms my suspicions. Amy turned away. Conflicted, Eleanor had warned against revealing too much, too soon, but circumstances were forcing her hand. Damon, there are things I haven't told you. A commotion below interrupted her. Samuel's voice called up urgently. Royal guards approaching. You must leave. They rushed downstairs. Samuel directed them to a hidden door behind tall storage shelves. This leads to the tannery next door. From there, you can reach the old church on Hill Street. The diary, Damon said urgently. We need to protect it. Samuel grabbed a small metal box from his workbench, lined with velvet. Put it here. I'll seal it and hide it in my vault until you can reclaim it. Amy hesitated, reluctant to part with her mother's words, but pragmatism prevailed. She placed the diary in the box, which Samuel quickly locked and concealed behind a false panel in his desk. Go now, he urged, as pounding sounded at the front door. They slipped through the hidden passage just as guards burst into the workshop. Through the wall, they heard Samuel's indignant protests at the invasion of his business. The passage emptied into a storage room reeking of leather and tanning chemicals. They navigated quickly through the busy workshop. Workers, too, absorbed in their tasks to notice two cloaked figures slipping out the back door. We need to separate, Damon said, once they reached the relative safety of a crowded marketplace. I'll draw their attention while you go to Eleanor. That's too dangerous, Amy protested. It's our best chance. Tell her what we found. He pressed a small object into her palm, a tarnished silver key. This was tucked into the diary's binding. It might open a compartment at Rose Hill, perhaps where the royal seal is hidden. Before she could argue further, he touched her cheek in a gesture so tender it stole her breath. Be careful, he whispered, then disappeared into the throng of market day shoppers. Amy reached North Street without incident, using alleys and side streets to avoid patrols. She knocked on Eleanor's door with their special pattern, relieved when it immediately opened. Inside, quickly, Eleanor hissed, pulling her through the doorway. You've heard what happened, Amy asked as Eleanor secured multiple locks. Half the city has heard. King Augustus has publicly accused his son of treason, claiming Damon conspired with Western Township rebels against the crown. Eleanor's weathered face was drawn with concern. The charges carry a death sentence, child. Amy's blood ran cold. He can and will. Unless, Eleanor studied her face. You found something at Rose Hill. Mother's diary, Amy confirmed. It documents Augustus's threats, his conspiracy with Lord Blackwood. We also discovered a key hidden in the binding. Eleanor's eyes widened. Catherine's diary. After all these years, she reached beneath her layers of clothing, withdrawing a medallion on a chain. Does it match this symbol? Amy gasped. The medallion bore the same royal crest sketched in the diary pages. A falcon with a crown. The true royal seal. Where did you get this? The night of the fire, Catherine gave me two things. You and this medallion. She said if anything happened, it would prove your identity when the time came. Eleanor's voice softened. I believe that time is now, child. Amy sank into a chair, the weight of her heritage suddenly overwhelming. Damon is getting closer to the truth. He's made the connection between you and Elizabeth. Elizabeth, Eleanor smiled faintly. A name I haven't used in 20 years. She straightened. Decision made. We must move quickly. The king's accusations against Damon have forced our hand. What can we do? Augustus controls the palace, the guards, the council, but not the truth, Eleanor replied firmly, and not the hearts of the people. Your mother's diary combined with this medallion provides proof of Augustus's treachery. But Damon is in danger now. We need to help him first. Eleanor paced the small room. The Western Township delegation might be sympathetic. They're still in the city, and their representatives carry diplomatic protection. A pounding at the door interrupted them. They froze, eyes locked in alarm. Open in the name of the king, a gruff voice commanded. Eleanor quickly passed the medallion to Amy. Hide this, she whispered. If they take us, say nothing of your identity or the diary. The door splintered inward as royal guards forced their way in. Lord Mercer stepped through the wreckage. his thin smile chilling. "Eleanor of North Street," he said smoothly. "Or should I say, Elizabeth Montgomery, former lady's maid to the late Queen Catherine." His cold gaze shifted to Amy. "And the princess who'd choose treason over loyalty to her king. How disappointing." "We've committed no treason," Amy said evenly. "Conspiring with a traitor is treason by definition." Mercer gestured to his guards. "Take them both to the palace. His Majesty wishes to question them personally." The great hall of the palace had been transformed into an impromptu court. King Augustus sat on his throne, crown glinting in the light streaming through tall windows. The royal council members occupied seats to his right, while Duchess Lillian and a sullen-looking Matthew stood to his left. At the center of the hall, Damon stood proud despite the chains binding his wrists. His face bore a fresh bruise, and his clothing was torn, but his blue eyes remained defiant. Guards forced Amy and Eleanor to kneel beside him. Damon's expression briefly registered shock at seeing them, followed by concern. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "Silence," the king thundered. He rose, addressing the assembled court. "Evidence of treason has been discovered, my son, whom I raised with every privilege, has conspired against the crown. He has spread lies about the legitimate succession, fomented unrest in the western townships, and sought to undermine royal authority." Augustus descended the dais steps, his face a mask of calculated sorrow. "It pains me deeply to see my own blood turn against me, against the kingdom. But treason cannot go unpunished, even when committed by a prince." "What evidence do you present, father?" Damon challenged. "What proof of these alleged crimes?" "Lord Mercer." Augustus nodded to his spy master, who stepped forward with a leather-bound book. Amy's heart sank. Somehow, they'd found the diary. "A most fascinating document," Mercer said, "filled with slanderous claims about His Majesty, discovered in Prince Damon's possession during his unauthorized visit to Rose Hill Haven. My brother's widow kept a fanciful journal," Augustus dismissed. "Her mental state was questionable in her final months. Using her delusions to justify rebellion is despicable." "They're not delusions," Damon said firmly. "The diary documents your threats against your brother, your conspiracy with Lord Blackwood to seize power. Baseless accusations," Augustus sneered. "Is this the evidence you've been seeking? The ramblings of a paranoid woman?" "There's more," Damon continued. "A witness who survived the fire, who can testify to what really happened that night." Augustus laughed coldly. "And who might this mysterious witness be?" "I am that witness," Eleanor said, rising to her feet despite a guard's attempt to keep her down. Her voice, strong and clear, carried throughout the hall. "I was Elizabeth Montgomery, personal attendant to Queen Catherine." A murmur rippled through the court. Augustus's face darkened. "A servant's testimony means nothing." "Not just a servant," Eleanor continued. "I was Queen Catherine's confidant. I helped hide her daughter, the true heir to the throne, the night you murdered her parents." The court erupted in shocked whispers. Augustus raised his hand for silence, his face contorted with rage. "Lies. The fire killed all who were in the royal wing that night." "Not all," Eleanor replied. She turned to Amy, her eyes asking a silent question. Amy nodded almost imperceptibly. The time for secrets had passed. Eleanor straightened to her full height, addressing the court. "I present to you the true heir of King Thomas and Queen Catherine, their daughter, Princess Amy Montgomery, rightful ruler of the Kingdom of New England." The hall exploded in chaos. Amy stood, facing her uncle with unwavering determination. "A preposterous claim," Augustus shouted over the uproar. "This beggar girl, my son's punishment, the royal princess, absurd." "Not absurd at all," came Matthew's voice, unexpectedly. He stepped forward from beside his mother, whose face had gone deathly pale. "In fact, it explains a great deal." Augustus whirled on him. "You dare—" "I dare to speak the truth," Matthew interrupted, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "A truth I suspected when I saw her at Rose Hill, a place she navigated with the familiarity of someone returning home." He approached Amy, studying her face. "She has Queen Catherine's eyes. How did none of us see it before?" Duchess Lillian grabbed her son's arm. "Matthew, stop this nonsense immediately." He shook her off. "No, Mother, I've watched you and the king play your power games my entire life. I've seen what ambition without conscience creates." He turned to address the council. "My lords, examine the evidence. Look at her and see the resemblance to our previous queen. Consider why the king has kept Rose Hill abandoned all these years." "Enough!" Augustus roared. "Guards, remove Lord Matthew. He's clearly deranged." "I think not, your majesty," said a commanding voice from the entrance. Every head turned to see William Frost, the former palace guard, entering with a contingent of armed men, the Western Township representatives and their security detail. "These proceedings concern the entire kingdom," William announced. "The Western delegation demands the right to witness them." As the newcomers filed in, Amy felt the medallion hidden against her skin, the physical proof of her birthright. The time had come to reclaim what was stolen, not just for herself, but for all who had suffered under Augustus's tyranny. In the charged silence that followed, she caught Damon's gaze. His eyes held no shock or betrayal at her revelation, only a dawning recognition, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. The great hall had transformed into a battlefield, not of swords and shields, but of accusations and revelations. King Augustus stood rigid on the dais, his face contorted with barely contained fury as William Frost and the Western delegates positioned themselves between the royal guards and the accused. "This interruption is an outrage," Augustus snarled. "You have no authority here." "On the contrary," replied a silver-haired man who stepped forward from the delegation. "I am Magistrate James Holloway of the Western Council. By the Treaty of 1640, representatives of the townships have the right to witness any proceedings involving accusations against citizens of our territories." "This is a family matter," the king retorted. "A treasonous prince, and a princess presumed dead for 20 years, Holloway interrupted, his gaze moving to Amy. "Tales of the fire that killed King Thomas have reached even our distant communities. If evidence exists that challenges the official account, it concerns all citizens of New England." Augustus's jaw clenched. He turned to the royal council members, seeking support, but found many avoiding his gaze. The unexpected arrival of the Western delegation had shifted the balance of power in the room. Duchess Lillian leaned close to the king, whispering urgently. He nodded once before addressing the hall again, his voice controlled but cold. "Very well. Let us examine these wild accusations properly." He returned to his throne. "The girl claims to be my brother's daughter. What proof can she offer beyond the word of an aging servant?" Amy stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "I have carried proof of my identity since the night of the fire, though I didn't know its significance until recently." She withdrew the medallion from her bodice, holding it high for all to see. The royal seal of the true monarch. Gasps rippled through the assembly. The medallion gleamed in the hall's light. A falcon with a crown, crafted in silver and gold, suspended from a delicate chain. "A trinket," Augustus dismissed. "Easily copied." "Not this one," Eleanor countered. "The true royal seal contains a secret only the legitimate ruler would know." Damon, still in chains, spoke up. "The falcon's eye, a tiny ruby that reveals a hidden compartment when pressed correctly." Augustus's face betrayed the first flicker of genuine fear. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because my mother showed me once." "When I was a child," Damon replied, "before you sent me away to the Northern Academy. She said the seal's secret was passed only to the rightful heirs." Amy examined the medallion, finding the ruby eye, with gentle pressure applied at a specific angle. A hidden compartment in the falcon's body sprang open. From it, she extracted a tightly folded piece of parchment. "The true succession document," Eleanor announced, "signed by King Thomas before his death, naming his daughter as heir should he and the queen perish before the prince came of age." William Frost approached, taking the document with reverent care. "I recognize King Thomas's signature. I served him faithfully before the fire." He passed it to Magistrate Holloway, who examined it closely before nodding confirmation. "This appears authentic," Holloway declared. "The royal seal and signature match official documents in our township archives." The royal council members began conferring urgently among themselves. One elderly lord stood shakily. "If this is true, it changes everything. The succession, it changes nothing," Augustus thundered, rising again. "Even if this girl is my niece, a claim I do not concede, She has lived as a beggar for 20 years. She knows nothing of ruling. The kingdom needs stability, not chaos. The kingdom needs truth, Damon countered. And justice. Augustus turned on his son, eyes blazing. You would betray your own father for a crown that was never yours to claim. I seek no crown, Damon replied evenly, only to right a terrible wrong from her position beside the throne. Duchess Lillian had been watching the proceedings with calculating eyes. Now she stepped forward, her elegant features arranged in an expression of concerned reasonableness. My lords, delegates, she addressed the assembly. These are serious matters that cannot be decided in haste. I propose we adjourn to allow cooler heads to prevail. The accused should remain under guard while the council verifies these documents and testimonies. A convenient delay, Eleanor observed sharply. Time enough for evidence to disappear and witnesses to meet with unfortunate accidents, as happened after King Thomas's death. You dare accuse, Lillian began. Yes, I dare, Eleanor cut her off. I was there the night of the fire. I saw Lord Blackwood, your first husband, Duchess, leading armed men not of the royal guard through the palace corridors. I heard him give the order to ensure no one escaped the royal apartments. All eyes turned to Lillian, whose composure finally cracked. You lying witch! You can prove nothing. Actually, came Matthew's voice. She can. He withdrew a folded document from inside his doublet. My father kept records of his less savory activities. Insurance, he called it, against any betrayal by his allies. He unfolded the paper, including detailed accounts of payments to the men who set the fire and sealed the royal apartments. Lillian stared at her son in horror. Where did you get that? From your private chambers, mother. The false-bottomed jewelry box where you keep your most treasured secrets. Matthew's face held a mixture of sadness and resolve. I've known for years. I just chose not to see it. You would betray your mother, your chance at the throne, Lillian whispered. I choose to end this cycle of betrayal, Matthew replied simply. Augustus, seeing his support crumbling, made a desperate final play. Guards, he shouted. Arrest the conspirators. This is still my kingdom, and my word is law. The palace guards hesitated, looking between the king and the Western delegation's armed men, who had shifted into defensive positions. The hall teetered on the edge of violence. No more blood, Amy said, her clear voice cutting through the tension. She approached the dais steps, stopping just short of her uncle. There has been enough violence, enough secrets. The people deserve to know the truth. What do you know of truth? Augustus sneered. You're nothing. A street beggar playing at royalty. I am Catherine Montgomery's daughter, Amy replied with quiet dignity. Raised by her most trusted servant to understand duty, justice, and compassion. Values this kingdom was founded upon. She turned to address the assembly. I don't seek vengeance. I seek restoration, of truth, of proper governance, of the trust between ruler and subjects. Her words resonated through the hall. Even Augustus seemed momentarily at a loss for response. Into this charged silence, Captain Reed of the Palace Guard stepped forward. He had been watching the proceedings with increasing distress. Now, he removed his helmet and knelt before Amy. I served your father faithfully, he said, his weathered face solemn. I was newly appointed to the Royal Guard when the fire occurred. Too junior to question orders that night. That failure has haunted me for 20 years. He drew his sword and laid it at her feet. If you are truly Thomas Montgomery's daughter, my loyalty belongs to you. One by one, other guards followed his example, kneeling and placing their weapons before Amy. The tide had turned decisively. Augustus, seeing his authority dissolve, made a desperate lunge toward Amy. I will not be usurped by a ghost, he snarled, reaching for her throat. Damon, despite his chains, threw himself forward to intercept his father, but it was Matthew who reached them first, blocking Augustus's attack and forcing him back. Enough, father, he said firmly. It's over. Augustus stared at him in disbelief. You too, my own. I am not your son, Matthew interrupted coldly. You've made that abundantly clear throughout my life. I am merely the bastard you tolerated for political convenience. The king's face contorted with rage. But before he could respond, he clutched suddenly at his chest, gasping. His knees buckled, and he collapsed on the dais steps. "Father," despite everything. Damon moved toward him in concern. The court physician rushed forward as guards carefully moved Augustus to a nearby bench. After a brief examination, the physician looked up gravely. "The king has suffered a seizure of the heart. He must be taken to his chambers immediately," as Augustus was carried from the hall. The Royal Council's senior member, Lord Harrington, approached Amy, Damon, and Eleanor. "These proceedings must be suspended while we address this development," he said cautiously. "But make no mistake, what has been revealed today cannot be undone. The council will need to deliberate on the succession in light of this evidence. The prince and princess should be released from custody," Magistrate Holloway insisted. "They have presented compelling evidence of their claims." After a moment's hesitation, Harrington nodded. "Release them, but they must remain in the palace under observation until the council reaches its decision." As a guard removed Damon's chains, he turned to Amy. "You could have told me," he said quietly. "I wanted to, many times," she replied, "but the risk was too great. You've lived your entire life preparing for this moment," he realized. "The education, the poise that seemed so out of place. It was your birthright asserting itself." Amy smiled faintly. "My only preparation was to survive and learn the truth." "What happens next?" She glanced around the great hall, at the faces now looking to her with curiosity and growing respect. "I never dared imagine." Eleanor, overhearing, placed a hand on Amy's shoulder. "What happens next, Your Highness, is that you claim what was stolen from you, not just a throne, but the chance to heal a kingdom." Matthew approached them cautiously. "The council will deliberate for days unless pressed, and my mother will not surrender her influence willingly." His expression was solemn. "This is merely the first battle in what may be a long war. Then we face it together," Damon said, looking between Amy and Matthew with new understanding. "All of us," as word of the dramatic confrontation spread through the palace and beyond. Citizens gathered in Boston streets, hungry for news. The seeds of rebellion had blossomed into something unexpected. Not a violent overthrow, but a reckoning with truth and a chance for renewal. 3 days after the confrontation in the Great Hall, King Augustus remained bedridden, drifting between consciousness and delirium. Court physicians spoke in hushed tones of his weakening condition. The palace existed in a state of suspended animation, the old order not yet fallen, the new not fully risen. The Royal Council had sequestered themselves in marathon sessions, emerging only for meals and fresh documents. Meanwhile, Boston seethed with rumors. The story of Amy's true identity had spread through the city like wildfire, growing more elaborate with each retelling in taverns and marketplaces. Citizens debated whether the beggar-turned-princess was an impostor or a miracle, a threat or a salvation. Amy stood at her chamber window, watching the city below. The room, once her mother's private study, had been hastily prepared for her following the council's decision to acknowledge her as Lady Amy Montgomery, while deliberations continued. The title fell short of full royal recognition, but represented a significant concession. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor entered, followed by Damon and, surprisingly, Matthew. "The council has called for an audience," Eleanor announced. "All 3 of you are summoned to hear their preliminary findings." "So quickly?" Amy asked. "I expected them to deliberate for weeks." "Something has forced their hand," Matthew said. "My sources say several northern lords have mobilized their household guards after hearing rumors of your return." Damon nodded grimly. "The longer the council delays, the greater the risk of armed factions taking matters into their own hands." "We should go," Amy decided. "But first," she moved to a small chest that had been brought from Eleanor's home. From it, she withdrew a simple gown of deep blue, not the magnificent attire of a princess, but elegant and dignified. "I'll face them as myself, not as anyone expects me to be." The council chamber was smaller than the Great Hall, but no less intimidating. Its walls were lined with portraits of previous monarchs, including King Thomas, Amy's father, whose kind eyes seemed to follow her as she entered. 12 council members sat at a long table, with Lord Harrington at its center. Duchess Lillian was notably absent. "Lady Amy, Prince Damon, Lord Matthew," Harrington acknowledged as they took their positions before the table. The council has reviewed the evidence presented regarding the succession and the events of 20 years ago. He gestured to several documents spread before them. The medallion's hidden parchment, Queen Catherine's diary, and records provided by Matthew implicating Lord Blackwood. While questions remain, Harrington continued, the council finds sufficient evidence to warrant a formal investigation into the circumstances of King Thomas's death and the subsequent succession. He cleared his throat uncomfortably. Furthermore, given Lady Amy's compelling claim to royal lineage, the council recognizes her right to be considered in matters of succession should King Augustus not recover. A murmur ran through the small audience of nobles permitted to observe the proceedings. This tepid acknowledgement clearly fell short of recognizing Amy as the rightful heir, but represented a crack in the wall of 20 years' deception. What of the king's treason charges against us? Damon asked. Suspended pending further investigation, Harrington replied. However, the council has another matter to address. He nodded to a clerk, who unrolled a formal proclamation. Today marks the 20th anniversary of King Augustus's coronation. Tradition demands a public celebration. Amy exchanged glances with Damon and Matthew. The timing couldn't be more provocative. A celebration of the very coronation whose legitimacy they challenged. The council proposes, Harrington continued, that all parties maintain decorum during today's ceremonies. The kingdom stands at a precipice. Any disruption could spark civil unrest. You expect us to celebrate the coronation of a usurper? Eleanor asked incredulously. We expect restraint while due process unfolds, Harrington countered. The alternative is chaos. Amy stepped forward. What exactly does this celebration entail? A public procession through Boston, followed by a formal reception at the palace, the clerk explained. His Majesty is too ill to participate, but tradition demands the royal family's presence. And who will represent the royal family with the king bedridden? Damon asked. Harrington looked uncomfortable. The Duchess Lillian will lead the procession as Queen Regent. You and Lady Amy are requested to attend as royal family members. Lord Matthew as well. Requested or commanded? Matthew asked dryly. The council strongly advises cooperation from all parties, Harrington replied diplomatically. A unified public appearance would reassure citizens while deliberations continue. Amy considered the implications. The council was attempting to maintain stability by preserving appearances, a reasonable goal, but one that meant temporarily accepting Lillian's authority. We will participate, she decided. On one condition, I wish to address the royal council privately, immediately following this audience. Harrington conferred briefly with his colleagues before nodding agreement, when all others had been dismissed. Amy faced the council alone. Gentlemen, she began, I understand your desire for stability. 20 years ago, similar concerns led this body to accept Augustus's claim without thorough investigation. That mistake cost the kingdom 2 decades of tyranny. Several councillors shifted uncomfortably. Today, you stand at another crossroads, Amy continued. I don't ask you to declare for me immediately. I ask only that you remember your oath, not to any individual monarch, but to the kingdom and its people. Lord Carmichael, the council's eldest member, leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing? Lady Amy, during today's ceremonies, observe Duchess Lillian carefully. She believes the council is merely delaying the inevitable recognition of her regency. Her confidence may lead her to reveal more than she intends. A thoughtful silence followed. Finally, Harrington nodded. We shall watch with particular attention. Boston's Central Avenue had been transformed for the coronation anniversary. Banners bearing the royal crest hung from buildings, and flower petals carpeted the processional route. Citizens packed the streets, their mood a volatile mixture of festivity and tension. The recent revelations had spread throughout the city. Creating an atmosphere of anticipation, the royal procession began at noon. Duchess Lillian led in a carriage of gilt and white, wearing a gown that stopped just short of full royal regalia. Her smile was triumphant as she waved to the crowds, clearly relishing her role as queen in all but name. Following at a careful distance, Damon and Amy rode in a simpler carriage with Matthew on horseback alongside. As they passed, the crowd's reaction shifted, confused at first, then increasingly enthusiastic as recognition spread. They know, Damon murmured. noting the changing expressions. "Word of your identity has reached the common people. Look there." Matthew pointed to a group of citizens holding small blue flowers, the same shade as Amy's gown. "The blue blossom was your father's symbol. They're showing support." The procession wound through Boston's districts, eventually returning to the palace where nobles and officials gathered for the formal reception. In the grand ballroom, Duchess Lillian had positioned herself before the throne on an elevated platform, receiving guests as if her regency were already confirmed. "Her presumption is extraordinary," Eleanor whispered to Amy as they observed from the ballroom's edge. "She's practically claiming the throne. She believes she's won," Amy replied. "Let her think so a little longer." The afternoon progressed with formal toasts and speeches celebrating King Augustus's reign. Throughout, council members circulated, watching reactions and gauging loyalties as Amy had suggested. The Western Township delegation stood apart, their presence a silent reminder of unresolved grievances. As sunset approached, Lillian rose for the traditional anniversary address. The ballroom hushed as she stepped forward. "Regal and confident, loyal subjects," she began. "We gather to honor 20 years of prosperity and strength under King Augustus's wise rule. Though His Majesty cannot be with us today, his vision continues." Her voice carried clear authority. "As regent, I pledge to maintain the stability and order he established." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. This was the first public claim of regency, a position the council had not yet granted. "Furthermore," Lillian continued, "in these uncertain times, immediate action is required. Therefore, with the council's support," she glanced at Harrington, who remained expressionless, "I am implementing emergency measures to preserve order. Beginning tomorrow, all public gatherings without royal permission are suspended. Additional guards will patrol Boston streets. These temporary restrictions will—" "On whose authority do you claim such power?" The question came from Magistrate Holloway, stepping forward from the Western delegation. Lillian's smile hardened. "As Queen Regent." "A position not yet confirmed by the council," Harrington interrupted, rising from his seat. The planned observation had yielded exactly the result Amy had anticipated, Lillian overplaying her hand. "A mere formality," Lillian dismissed. "With the king incapacitated, the succession remains under investigation," Harrington stated firmly. "The council has made no determination regarding regency." Lillian's composure slipped. "This kingdom needs leadership, not deliberation. Augustus trusted me to—" "To what, Duchess?" Amy stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent ballroom. "To continue the deception that began 20 years ago. To maintain power built on murder and usurpation." All eyes turned to her. In her simple blue gown, surrounded by the opulent costumes of the court, Amy nevertheless commanded attention through presence alone. "The time for half-truths has passed," she continued, addressing not just Lillian but the entire assembly. "Today we commemorate a coronation stained with innocent blood. I stand before you not seeking vengeance, but restoration, of truth, of justice, and of the vision my father had for this kingdom." In that moment, with sunlight streaming through tall windows to illuminate her, the resemblance to the portrait of Queen Catherine in the council chamber was unmistakable. A collective gasp rippled through the nobles who had known the previous royal family. "This is sedition," Lillian hissed. "Guards, remove her." The palace guards hesitated, looking between Lillian and the council members, who had risen to their feet. Into this tense tableau, a new voice spoke, weak but clear. From the ballroom entrance, "Let her speak." King Augustus stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on a cane, his face ashen but his eyes alert. The physician hovered anxiously beside him. "I would hear," Augustus said, "what my niece has to say." A ripple of shock passed through the ballroom as King Augustus slowly made his way forward, each step visibly paining him. Guards rushed to offer support, but he waved them away, determined to maintain what dignity remained. The court physician followed anxiously, clearly disapproving of his patient's sudden appearance. "Your Majesty," Duchess Lillian hurried to his side, her voice honeyed with concern. "You should be resting. Allow me to handle these disturbances." Augustus ignored her, his gaze fixed on Amy. "So, you've claimed your identity at last." His voice, though weakened, carried the same imperious tone that had commanded the kingdom for 20 years. I wondered when this day would come. The assembly fell silent, straining to hear this unexpected exchange. You recognize me then? Amy asked, surprised by this admission. A bitter smile crossed Augustus's pale face. How could I not? You have Catherine's eyes. I suspected from the moment Mercer brought you before me. A beggar girl with the bearing of royalty. He gestured weakly toward Damon. Why else choose you as punishment for my too idealistic son? Gasps and whispers erupted throughout the ballroom. Lillian's face drained of color. You knew, she hissed at Augustus. All this time. I suspected, he corrected. But suspicion is not certainty, and a half-dead claim is easily dismissed. Amy stepped closer, studying the man who had destroyed her family. Up close, Augustus looked diminished, not just by illness, but by the weight of his deceptions. Why acknowledge me now? She asked. Augustus's laugh dissolved into a cough. When he recovered, his eyes held a cunning that illness couldn't dull. Because, niece, I'm dying. The physicians give me days, perhaps hours, and I find I have one final move to make in this long game. He turned to address the stunned court. For 20 years, I have ruled this kingdom with strength. I have maintained order, expanded our territories, and kept foreign powers at bay. My methods have been harsh, yes, but effective. Your methods included fratricide, Eleanor said sharply from beside Amy. Augustus didn't deny it. My brother was weak. His reforms would have invited chaos, diminished royal authority, empowered those who should remain subservient. I did what was necessary. You murdered your own brother for power, Damon said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Nothing justifies that betrayal. Perhaps not in your idealistic worldview, Augustus conceded, but history judges rulers by their legacy, not their methods, and my legacy. He paused, studying the faces around him. Nobles who had prospered under his rule, officials who had enforced his policies, subjects who had feared him. My legacy is complicated by what happens next. With visible effort, Augustus straightened. I hereby recognize Amy Montgomery as my brother's legitimate daughter and heir. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Lillian grabbed Augustus's arm. Have you lost your mind? You can't. I can, and I have. He cut her off. The Royal Council sought evidence of Amy's claim. I have just provided it through royal recognition. Lord Harrington stepped forward, his expression cautious. Your Majesty, this unexpected declaration changes the Council's considerations significantly. That's precisely my intention, Augustus replied. He turned back to Amy, his eyes calculating. You see, niece, I'd rather see you on the throne than watch Lillian rule through regency. At least you have royal blood. This is insanity, Lillian sputtered. After everything we've built, everything I built, Augustus corrected coldly. You were merely a convenient alliance. Lillian, did you truly believe I didn't see your ambitions, your plans for after my death? Matthew moved to his mother's side, his face grim. Father, this helps no one. It only creates more division. On the contrary, Augustus replied, it creates clarity. He addressed the assembly again. My recognition comes with conditions. Amy Montgomery must swear to maintain existing alliances, honor noble privileges, and, most importantly, grant full pardon to all involved in past events, including myself. The room fell silent as understanding dawned. Augustus wasn't seeking redemption. He was attempting one final manipulation, securing his legacy while escaping judgment. Even in death, Amy studied her uncle, the man who had orchestrated her parents' murder, who had stolen her birthright, who had ruled through fear rather than justice. Now he offered her the throne, but at the price of absolution for his crimes. A clever strategy, she acknowledged, her voice steady. You offer what was never yours to withhold, in exchange for immunity from justice. Augustus's lips curled in a sardonic smile. Politics, my dear niece. You'll need such pragmatism if you hope to rule effectively. There is a difference, Amy replied, between pragmatism and moral surrender. She addressed the court directly. I will not build a reign on bargains with tyranny. The path forward requires truth, painful though it may be, before healing can begin. Augustus's expression hardened. Then you are as foolishly idealistic as your father. This kingdom needs Justice, Damon interrupted, moving to stand beside Amy. It needs justice, Father. Something your reign never provided. The tension in the ballroom was palpable as Augustus and Amy faced each other. The dying usurper and the rightful heir. 2 decades of history balanced on this moment. Suddenly, Augustus staggered, clutching his chest. The physician rushed forward as guards helped lower the king to a nearby chair. For several tense moments, the royal physician worked urgently, administering remedies from his case. When Augustus spoke again, his voice was weaker, but his eyes remained alert. The council will decide the succession, he managed. But remember this, kingdoms are not ruled by ideals. They are ruled by strength and necessity. His gaze shifted to Damon. Something I failed to teach you, my son. You taught me exactly what kind of king I never wished to be, Damon replied quietly. Augustus's laugh turned into another coughing fit. When it subsided, he fixed his gaze on Amy once more. You have your mother's eyes, but your father's stubborn heart. I wonder which will serve you better in the end. He beckoned Lord Harrington closer. The council will witness my final declaration. What happened next occurred with such swiftness that many would later debate the exact sequence. Augustus, apparently gathering his remaining strength for an official pronouncement, suddenly lunged toward Amy. From his sleeve appeared a small dagger, a last desperate act from a man who had lived by treachery. Several people moved at once. Damon shouted a warning. Eleanor reached for Amy. Guards rushed forward, but it was Lillian who reacted most unexpectedly, blocking Augustus's path to Amy. Whether she intended to assist his attack or prevent it would remain forever unclear. The dagger caught her across the arm, drawing blood before clattering to the floor as Augustus collapsed. Within moments, the king lay unconscious, attended by the frantic physician. Lillian stood frozen, staring at her bleeding arm in apparent shock. Mother. Matthew moved quickly to her side, tearing a strip from his formal sash to bind her wound. He would have killed you, Lillian said, her voice strange and distant as she looked at Amy. After everything I sacrificed for him, he would have thrown it all away for one last act of violence. The physician looked up from Augustus's still form, his expression grave. The king is dying. The strain was too much for his weakened heart. He may have minutes, not hours. Lord Harrington turned to the royal council members, who had gathered nearby. We must act quickly. The kingdom cannot remain in limbo. The succession documents are clear, Councillor Carmichael stated. With the king's recognition of Lady Amy's identity and the evidence presented regarding the circumstances of King Thomas's death, there is only one legitimate course. The council members conferred briefly before Harrington approached Amy, who stood calm amid the chaos, her hand clasped in Damon's. The Royal Council of New England, Harrington announced formally, recognizes Amy Montgomery as the rightful heir to the throne, by blood and by law. He knelt before her, the other council members following suit. Long live Queen Amy. The proclamation rippled through the ballroom as nobles and officials knelt one by one. Among them, surprisingly, was Lillian, her face unreadable as she made a shallow curtsy, still supported by her son, as the traditional acknowledgement echoed through the assembly. Long live the Queen. Amy felt the weight of history and responsibility descend upon her shoulders. She looked to Damon, whose eyes held both pride and understanding of the challenges ahead. The first act of my reign, Amy declared, her voice clear and carrying, will be to establish a truth council, not for vengeance, but for healing. This kingdom must face its past before it can build its future. She turned to Eleanor, who stood tall despite the tears in her eyes. And I ask Elizabeth Montgomery, loyal servant to the crown through the darkest of times, to serve as my chief advisor. Eleanor curtsied deeply. I have waited 20 years for this moment, Your Majesty. I am honored to continue serving the true royal line. As the physician and guards carried Augustus from the ballroom, Matthew approached Amy and Damon. He bowed formally before speaking. Your Majesty, whatever comes next, know that I will support your legitimate rule. He glanced at his mother, who stood apart, her expression distant. Some wounds take longer to heal than others, but today marks the beginning of that process. Outside the palace windows, the sun was setting on Boston Harbor, casting long shadows across the city. As word spread of the dramatic events within the palace walls, Citizens gathered in streets and squares, lighting candles in what would later be called the Night of Restoration. When Amy stepped onto the palace balcony, Damon at her side, the crowd below erupted in cheers. Looking out at her kingdom, at faces filled with hope after years of oppression, Amy Montgomery, once hidden princess, now rightful queen, made a silent vow to honor the sacrifices that had led to this moment. The crown she would soon wear had been stained by blood, but under her guidance, it would become a symbol not of tyranny, but of justice and renewal.